Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 296, Breaking the News. As Alex slept, the Cliftons ordered a takeover of all the hotels, restaurants, casinos, and bars in Baltimore. In just over 2 hours, every Stedman business in the city was under the control of the Clifton family. The reports started dribbling in. "Sir, Leonard Hotel was taken over by the Clifton family, and the manager was severely beaten." "Mr. Stedman, the casino on the east side has been taken over." "I'm sorry, Mr. Stedman, but the Cliftons made me an offer I couldn't refuse. There's nothing I can do. I'll be forced to do business with them. Please understand." Many of Art Stedman's people had surrendered to the Clifton family, and Art felt like a king who had lost his country. He sat quietly, looking lonely, sad, and desperate. Chris watched his father, not daring to approach him. The phone rang again, and Art checked the caller ID. It was Tyson from the Blood Brothers gang. Art scowled. Tyson had sworn that he was sending people who were invincible within the martial arts world. What a joke. Art wanted to answer the phone and give Tyson a piece of his mind, but he knew he couldn't afford to make any more enemies. He had dealt with the Blood Brothers gang for many years, and he knew what would happen if he insulted them. If he dared to curse at Tyson, then men would be sent out to deal with Art, permanently. The Blood Brothers were useless. An American congressman had been killed on his way to work after he submitted a proposal about demolishing the gang's headquarters. So far, the police hadn't found any evidence that the Blood Brothers had been responsible, but everyone knew they were. "Hello, Mr. Slade," Art said, suppressing his anger and keeping his tone respectful. "Mr. Stedman, I'm sure the fighting has been finished for a while now," Tyson said. "Have you been so busy controlling the Baltimore underworld that you forgot to call me?" He was annoyed that Art hadn't been in touch with an update. In California, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Tyson had finished practicing his martial arts and wanted to check on the situation in Baltimore. Now that Damon had finished up there, he would be on his way home. Once he was back, he could focus on the gang's issues on their turf. "No," Art said. After a pause, he told Tyson what had happened. "I'm afraid things didn't go according to plan. In fact, not only did Damon lose, but he's now dead." "What?" Tyson bellowed. He couldn't believe Damon had lost the match, let alone died in the fight. He was one of their most promising young members. Tyson felt the loss keenly. "Who defeated him?" he asked. Only a few fighters were experienced enough to have defeated Damon, and he wouldn't have expected any of them to be fighting in Baltimore. "A 20-year-old man," Art said, "the security guard at Johns Hopkins University." "Someone that young?" Tyson asked, surprised. He hadn't heard of anyone that age who could match Damon's skill. "I never saw that coming. A 20-year-old man strong enough to have killed Damon. I really want to meet this guy." He didn't kill Damon, Art said. After his leg was broken, Damon felt he would never regain his martial arts skills, so he killed himself. That sounds like Damon, Tyson said. He knew there was no coming back, and if he couldn't work for the Blood Brothers, his life was over. Tyson sighed. Mr. Stedman, when my men arrive, I'll bring them back to help you regain the Baltimore underworld. I give you my word. This is not the end. When can I expect you? Art asked, feeling a glimmer of hope. I'm looking forward to meeting you. If the Blood Brothers came back quickly, Art could regain all his territory in no time. I'll start making plans right away, Tyson assured him. Also, I need to find the man who defeated Damon and deal with him. If you need any help, please let me know, Art said, and then he hung up the phone. Tyson walked into one of his private rooms, which had a large screen on the wall. He set up a video call with Lee Harshaw. Lee didn't usually live with the gang. Instead, he had a place in California with dense woods, which was close to the lake. There, he devoted himself to studying martial arts. Soon, Lee's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting by the lake, and he was shirtless, his muscles on display. Tyson, Lee said, can I help you with something? Lee, I have bad news, Tyson said. You should prepare yourself. He stopped for a moment and then continued. Damon lost his fight in Baltimore, and he was too ashamed to face us. So he committed suicide. Lee was stunned. Damon had been with him since he was a baby. Lee had practically raised him, and he regarded Damon as his flesh and blood. And now Damon was dead. Lee couldn't believe it. Lee, are you okay? Tyson asked. When Lee remained silent, Tyson felt he needed to say something. Damon didn't want to lose face, so he decided to go out on his own terms. You should be proud. Lee closed his eyes, and 2 tears slid down his cheeks. He couldn't see the point of being proud when Damon was gone forever. He opened his eyes. Who did he fight with? He asked, his tone icy. A university security guard, Tyson said. I'll have more information soon. Thank you, Lee said. He killed my beloved apprentice, and I need him to pay for that. He was determined to avenge Damon. This security guard is now our enemy number 1, Tyson assured him. He defeated Damon, so who knows what he'll do in the future. We can't allow him to grow any stronger, or he might get in our way. Tyson was determined to deal with this threat. Otherwise, the security guard could disrupt all their plans. I'll kill this guard with one stroke, Lee exclaimed. He hated this man who had killed Damon, and he wanted him gone, now. No, Tyson said. At Lee's puzzled look, he went on to explain. We have to be smart about this. If we break the rules to take our revenge, we will be ostracized from the martial arts world. We'll be a joke. So I can't avenge my apprentice? Lee asked in a choked voice. Of course you can, Tyson said. The security guard must die to prevent him from causing us trouble. But first we need to deal with the problem in Baltimore, and then we can make a plan to deal with this guard. Yes, Lee agreed. I'm sure we can find an excuse to fight him. Practice your own martial arts, Tyson told him. In a few days, you can go and get your revenge. But you shouldn't underestimate this man. Damon was defeated because he was careless. So don't make the same mistake. I'll wait for your message, Lee said. He would bide his time for now, but then the security guard would die. Episode 297, Corporate Disaster. The next day, in Washington, D.C., the sun rose over the peaceful Drake mansion. Reginald Drake had dealt with the impact of David's failed wedding, and everything returned to normal. They knew Alex was the eldest son of the Ambrose family, and Debbie was the granddaughter of Jessup Clifton. They were both from important families, so even though Alex had stolen his bride, David had to treat him with respect. Since David had returned from overseas, he had been busy arranging his doomed marriage, but now it was time to get back to work. Reginald had decided to allow David to get more involved with the family business, the Fidelity Group. Reginald was starting David off as an assistant manager, where he could gradually rise through the ranks. Once David had developed a thorough understanding of the business and had established his credentials, Reginald would hand over the Fidelity Group to him. Reginald had devoted much of his life to the business, but now he could retire. He planned to travel around the world, catch up on his reading, and do charity work in the most impoverished parts of the world. He was looking forward to it. But first, he had to ensure that his son's transition to leadership was as smooth as possible. "Remember, David," he said as they traveled in the car, "although you are my son, many of the others have been with me for over 30 years, helping me to build up the business. You should treat them with respect." David listened attentively. The Fidelity Group was enormous and highly influential. Running it would be a massive undertaking, and David was feeling the pressure. The car arrived at the company headquarters, and Reginald and David got out. On the way to the conference room, all the employees stopped to speak to them. Inside the room, all the department heads were already sitting around the table, waiting for them. As soon as Reginald and David came in, everyone greeted them. "Good morning," Reginald said, sitting down at the head of the table, leaving David still standing. "There's not a lot to discuss today," Reginald said. "I just wanted to inform you that my son, David, will be joining us as the new assistant manager of the marketing department. Mr. Rice, will you help him get settled?" "Yes, of course," Victor Rice said. "I'm sure it won't take David long to learn the job." "Good," Reginald said. He leaned back in his chair and looked around at everyone. "Let's start with the usual progress reports." Then he whispered to David, "Listen carefully." He wanted David to understand how the business operated. The Fidelity Group consisted of a number of different businesses, including construction, hospitality, and healthcare. Their private hospitals had been increasing their profits for the last 3 months. "Fidelity Construction has begun work on the freeway expansion and everything is running smoothly," said the person in charge of that project. "Fidelity Pharmaceuticals has just signed a contract worth $30 million to provide drugs and medical devices to 4 hospitals, reported another manager. "At present, we are still negotiating with 2 other hospitals, but we're confident of success." The managers continued to report on the department's progress. It took some time to get around everyone. The Fidelity Group seemed to have a hand in everything. The amounts of money being discussed were staggering, and they were only reporting on the last few months. How much more would they make over an entire year? David had always known his family had money, but he hadn't known how much. Now he knew the Drake family was far wealthier than he would have ever guessed. Once the managers had finished their reports, Reginald turned to David and whispered, "Do you understand now? Will you work hard to earn your place here?" "Yes, Dad," David said. "I get it, and I'll make sure I learn quickly." "Very good," Reginald said, nodding with satisfaction. He looked at the others, ready to end the meeting. The phone of the head of Fidelity Pharmaceuticals had vibrated 3 times during the meeting. His assistant had been calling him, but he hadn't answered. Now his phone buzzed with a message. He looked at it and gaped in shock, beginning to panic. "Mr. Drake," he said. "What's the matter?" Reginald asked. "Why are you so flustered?" "I've just been told that those 2 hospitals have suspended negotiations with us," he said. "And even worse, the 4 hospitals that had already reached an agreement with us have broken their contracts. They're refusing to accept any of our medical devices." "What?" Reginald yelled. Something strange was going on. "Talk to them. Use every means necessary to get them back on side." "Yes, sir." The person in charge of the pharmaceutical company called his assistant to find out what was going on. Several other phones vibrated, and the managers of the Fidelity Group's subsidiary companies received calls from their assistants. "Answer them," Reginald said, growing concerned. The managers answered their phones. As they spoke with their assistants, they grew extremely anxious. None of the calls was good news. Everyone reported their problems to Reginald. "Mr. Drake, the government has opened an investigation on the freeway project. There were claims we used bribery to win the contract. The project cannot continue until the investigation is complete, and the delay will cost us a lot of money." "One of our hospitals has failed a health inspection. The report says that the standard of hygiene was not acceptable and several of the staff did not have the appropriate qualifications. Fidelity Healthcare has been given a large fine, and the hospital's been forced to close. Word has spread, and our clients have lost confidence in us. Fidelity Fitness has been accused of selling performance-enhancing drugs out of our gyms. Our fitness centers have had to close, and our members are asking for refunds. Our top movie star wants to terminate her contract with Fidelity Investment." Almost all the subsidiary companies were experiencing similar problems, and each disaster would cost them a lot of money. The managers were all confused and anxious. How could all their companies be in trouble at the same time? "Dad, what's going on?" David asked, confused. This was all too strange. "Is someone deliberately targeting us?" Reginald remained silent. He frowned as he thought it over. Who could have done this? He wondered. Who wants to hurt my family? But he couldn't think of a single person who held such a grudge. He had always thought he had treated people fairly. So how on earth had he managed to offend someone with the ability to damage all his companies at once? "Each of you go and deal with your own companies," he ordered the executives. "Do whatever you can to limit the damage and repair the company's reputation. And keep me updated." "Yes, sir," the managers filed out. As they left, one of them sneaked a look at Reginald and sneered. Noah Freeman had joined the company more than 30 years ago, but he was jealous of Reginald. They had both put in the same amount of time and effort, but Reginald was one of the richest men in Washington, D.C., while Noah was merely one of his employees. A few days ago, Colin Patterson had invited Noah out for a drink and had encouraged him to act against the Drake family. Now, Noah's allegiance was to the Patterson family, and he planned to help them destroy the Drakes when the time was right. Noah walked out of the Fidelity Group headquarters and made his way to the Pattersons' villa. When he got there, he walked inside and was taken to Colin's room. He could hear moaning and groaning, and when he pushed the door open, his eyes opened wide and his mouth dropped open. 298. Can I borrow a few $1 billion? Colin was lying in bed with two attractive blonde women. All three of them were naked. Colin adored beautiful women, and he had always been partial to blondes. He had found these two at a local beauty pageant and had been with them for a month. Noah's eyes were bulging, and his mouth was hanging open as he stared at the women. "Hey, babes," Colin said. "Wait here and don't move. I need to speak with my friend, okay? I'll be back soon." He pulled on a pair of boxer shorts, got out of bed, and pulled the covers up over the women. "Noah, I assume you have some good news for me?" Colin asked, walking toward him. The previous day, Nathan Ambrose had told Colin that he would be attacking the Drake family. So, Colin guessed that was why Noah was here. "You know I do," Noah said with a smile. "I assume you're behind the chaos with the Fidelity Group?" "How is the Drake family?" Colin asked. "This morning, the company received numerous phone calls, each regarding an unprecedented crisis," Noah reported. "Reginald has sent everyone back to their respective companies to deal with the problems. He was just sitting there, completely miserable and unable to understand what's happening. It was a glorious sight." "How much do you think the Drake family lost today?" Colin asked. "They've already incurred losses of nearly $2 billion, Noah said, almost cackling with glee. "Contracts are being ripped up, and the people are demanding refunds, so they'll lose even more money. This is the biggest crisis in the Drake family's history. If they can't find a way out, they'll end up bankrupt." "Really?" Colin was both shocked and pleased. Nathan Ambrose was something. In just one morning, he had irreparably damaged the Drake family. Now, the Pattersons were one step closer to taking over the Drakes as the most powerful family in Washington, D.C. "Colin, whoever you have backing you is seriously connected," Noah said, his tone odd. "I can't think of any family in the country who could do all that so quickly." He knew Colin couldn't have achieved this on his own. There must be someone more powerful helping him. "What's next? Are you going to keep up the pressure on the Drake family?" "Of course," Colin said. "Soon the Pattersons will be the top family in Washington, D.C., and the Drake family will be nothing." He looked at Noah. "Go back and keep an eye on what's happening. I believe my backer intends to launch a final attack on the Drake family soon. When I find out more, I'll let you know." "Okay," Noah said. "I'll wait for your call." He left the villa. Over the day, the problems faced by the subsidiaries of the Fidelity Group showed no signs of improvement. On the contrary, the situation grew even more serious. Reginald talked to several companies that had broken off negotiations with the Fidelity Group. He tried to make concessions, but they wouldn't engage with him at all. He asked them for an explanation. It just didn't make sense. Neither side would benefit unless they could find a more powerful business partner. The companies refused to explain. They had all been warned by much more powerful companies to stop working with the Fidelity Group. They were told that they would receive compensation for losses incurred by the breach of contract. But if they continued to work with the Fidelity Group, they would become the next target. Faced with such heavy pressure, the companies chose to terminate their contracts. Reginald investigated the owners of several of the companies that had threatened their business partners, but he couldn't find connections between them. Somewhere behind these companies was an exceptionally powerful person who was controlling everything. Reginald sat in an office, brooding over everything that had happened. He was frustrated, and he didn't know how the Drake family could survive this catastrophe. "Dad, what's wrong?" David asked. He knew little about the business world, but he had confidence in his father. He didn't like seeing him so rattled. "We've lost a lot of money," Reginald said, his voice bleak. "All our projects have ground to a halt, and there's little hope of improvement in the near future. Employees will start to resign once word gets out, and that'll make things even more difficult." "Dad, the other companies broke their contracts, not us," David said. "They need to pay us compensation." "It doesn't matter," Reginald said, sighing. "It would take some time before we saw any of that money, and I'm not sure we have that long." "Dad, no," David protested. "The Fidelity Group cannot fail. You're one of the top businessmen in Washington, D.C., so I know you'll get through this." Reginald had lost his confidence, so David tried to encourage him. "Our family has billions of dollars. We've only lost $2 billion, so let's use some of our money to deal with this." Reginald had never told David how much money the family had, but David had seen online articles about them, and he knew his family's assets were at least $30 billion. So why couldn't they use some of that to fix this crisis? Reginald shook his head and smiled bitterly. David still had a lot to learn. "David, although we have tens of billions of dollars in assets, most of them are fixed assets, such as houses, cars, and shares in various companies," Reginald explained. "They can't be realized immediately. Do you understand?" David got a sinking feeling. "How much money do we need to get through this?" he asked. "Right now, we can get our hands on $500,000, Reginald said. "But we need at least $2.5 billion to fix this." $2.5 billion, David thought, collapsing into a chair. Even though he was used to wealth, that was a shocking amount of money. But no matter how difficult it was, he would have to try. Otherwise, the Fidelity Group, which his father had spent decades building, would collapse. "Dad, don't worry," he said. "We'll find a way to get the money, whatever it takes. We have to save the Fidelity Group." He stood up and looked at his father, eager to get started. Reginald shook his head and sighed. He knew there was no way to get that kind of money. "Dad, trust me," David said. "I won't let the company fall. I'll go and get the money now." With that, he hurried out of the office. David drove to see the manager of the local branch of the Horizons Bank and asked him for a loan. The Fidelity Group's problems had already impacted the city, and the bank manager was aware of what was happening. Lending money to the Drake family now would be risky, and the manager would be in a lot of trouble. He was far too experienced to make such a mistake. No matter how much David begged, the bank manager stayed strong and refused to lend any money to the Drake family. David spent more than an hour pleading with him, but to no avail. He also called his former classmates from when he had studied abroad. They were all rich, and David hoped to borrow money from them. But when they heard what was happening, they all pleaded for poverty. Everyone said they wanted to help, but were unable to do so. David called more than 20 people, and only 2 of them were willing to help, but they could only give him $500,000. It was a drop in the ocean compared to what they needed. David threw his mobile phone to the ground. "When we were students together, how many times did they say we'd be friends for life?" he muttered. "We promised we would always help each other when we could." He shook his head. "Liars, the lot of them." He was disgusted by their behavior. David was so angry he could barely breathe. He picked up his phone and discovered a couple of cracks on the screen. He opened up his social media page. This was his last hope. Perhaps here he could find some of his rich friends to help him. When he checked his notifications, he found a lot of unread messages, and many people had tagged him. "David, what happened?" "I heard that all the Drake businesses ran into problems at the same time, and the company is falling apart. What's going on?" "I tried calling David, but he didn't answer." "David, when you get this, message me back." "I'm sorry, David. We're here for you." Episode 299, Drumming Up Support. When he saw all the messages of support, David felt a little better. These were his oldest friends, and also the most trustworthy. His eyes shone with tears, and the display grew blurry. He typed out a message and posted it. "Thank you." His friends responded right away. "David, you've always been there for me, so I'm here for you now." "What happened? Let us know what we can do to help." David smiled and posted another message. "Come to the headquarters of the Fidelity Group tomorrow, and I'll tell you more about it then." He thought for a moment, and then he added some more. "We suspect that someone is deliberately targeting our family. So be as high profile as you can tomorrow. Let's show my enemy how many people support the Drakes." David hoped their support would make the mysterious attacker think twice about messing with the Drake family. His friends would help him through this difficult time. Everyone agreed with David's suggestion. "I can do that. We'll be there tomorrow to support you." "I'll bring my flashiest car. That should get some attention." "We'll show this scumbag that he can't mess with the Drake family." David sighed with relief. He put his phone away and made his way to the Fidelity Group headquarters to support his father. Colin lay in his bed with 2 beautiful women, scowling as he read the online comments. In a few days, his family would be the most powerful in Washington, D.C., so everyone should be loyal to him. He was jealous of the kindness being shown to David. He scrolled through his phone, looking at every single message, and then he sneered. "You have no idea that I'm the one who harmed the Drake family," he muttered. "I can see everything you say, and I'll make you pay for every word." He read some more messages. "Poor David. Do you really think you can turn this around?" He laughed. "Purely wishful thinking. The Ambrose family is the strongest in the world. No matter what you do, it'll all be in vain. he snorted. I hope I get to see the expression on your face when you realize I did this to you. While Colin was talking to himself, his phone rang. It was Nathan Ambrose's number, so Colin answered straight away. Mr. Ambrose, Colin said, his tone respectful. I assume you've seen what happened to the Drake family? Nathan drawled. He had used his influence to lean on various companies, forcing them to abandon all ties with the Drake family. He had more than enough money to cover any fines for breaches of contract. When he hadn't been able to threaten or bribe a company, he had simply arranged for officials to make surprise inspections. And whenever they hadn't been able to find a problem, they had created one. Many people had considered it impossible to defeat the Drake family, but for Nathan Ambrose, it had been simple. Yes, I saw, Colin said. All the Fidelity Group companies are in crisis. Reginald is worried his family may not survive. He's still at the company headquarters, and David is begging his friends for help online. I expected all of that, Nathan said. No one can escape once I move against them. He chuckled, pleased with himself. Go to the Fidelity Group headquarters tomorrow and buy the company from the Drakes. I'll provide you with the $35 billion needed to purchase it. Once that's done, your family will be the most powerful family in Washington, D.C. But remember that you still answer to me. Yes, I know, Colin said. But, Mr. Ambrose, isn't tomorrow a bit too soon to act? Maybe we should wait for a few days. If we go in too early, Reginald might not agree to sell. This has to be dealt with quickly, Nathan said. My grandfather can't know anything about it. After all, the Drakes also serve the Ambrose family. The Drake family paid a large sum of money to the Ambrose family every year. So if Nathan's grandfather found out that Nathan had attacked the Drakes without permission, he would be furious, and Nathan would be severely punished. Lincoln Ambrose was currently at the family estate, undergoing various relaxation therapies. Nathan had arranged for the treatments to last for 3 days, and during this period, Lincoln would have little contact with the outside world. Nathan wanted to make the most of this time to hide his activities from his grandfather. I understand, Colin said. I'll go to the Fidelity Group tomorrow and buy the business. The next day, the Drake family was all over the news in Washington, D.C., and many reporters were cramped outside the Fidelity Group's headquarters. Security guards blocked the door, preventing the press from entering. The reporters were noisy, clamoring for an interview with Reginald Drake. David and his father had stayed in their offices the night before. David had finally fallen asleep, but Reginald had been awake all night. Dad, you should eat something, David said, handing him some food. If you don't, you could get sick. I'm not in the mood, but you go ahead, Reginald sighed. He had spent the night trying to think of a plan, but he hadn't been able to find a way out of their current predicament. David took out his damaged cell phone and posted a message to the group chat. Are you here yet? Hurry up, and thank you for your help. He hadn't managed to raise any money, but he still had the support of his friends. He needed the person responsible for coming after his family to know that they wouldn't go down without a fight. Soon his friends replied, On my way now. I'm coming, wait for me. Just give me half an hour and I'll be there. David smiled as he read the messages. He freshened himself up in the bathroom, and then he took the elevator down to the lobby to meet his friends. "It's David Drake!" cried a reporter. The others looked over and then rushed toward him. If the security guard hadn't stepped in, then David would have been overrun. The press all shouted out questions. "Mr. Drake, what's going on with your family?" "This is the biggest crisis in your family's history. Can the Drake family survive this? There are rumors you're facing bankruptcy. Is that true?" "What are your family's plans? Have they already applied for bankruptcy?" They jostled each other as they held out microphones, waiting for David to speak. They cared nothing about David's feelings as they asked their probing questions. "The Fidelity Group will survive," David said, suppressing his anger. "And my family will not be applying for bankruptcy. Someone has deliberately targeted us using underhanded methods, but they will not succeed. The Drake family has come through this stronger than ever." The reporters didn't believe him. They had already investigated the matter, and they knew that the Drake family had already lost more than $2 billion, and that loss would continue to grow. If the Drakes couldn't come up with enough money to cover their losses, then they would be forced to declare bankruptcy. They all knew that the Drakes only had access to $500,000, so it would be impossible for them to recover from this. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. A fancy car drove up, and everyone turned to see who had arrived. When a man stepped out of the car, the press recognized him instantly. It was Jason Morley. "David, I'm not late, am I?" Jason asked, smiling as he walked over to David. "Not at all," David said, hugging his friend. Before the reporters could discover why Jason was there, more cars drove up. Each was a luxury model, and the people who got out of them were famously rich. Derek Jackson, Kevin Ashcroft, and Ralph Baldwin all had come to support David. Daryl had also come with Miriam. He hadn't wanted to get involved, but all their other friends had promised to be there, so if Daryl stayed away, it wouldn't have looked good. They all walked over to David and greeted him warmly. The journalists watched in awe, impressed with the level of support David had. But would it be enough to save the Drake family? Episode 300, Different Motives. The reporters weren't interested in why David's friends had shown up. They just wanted to watch the downfall of the Drake family. That was the story that would make them a lot of money. It didn't matter to them how long it had taken the Drakes to build the Fidelity Group into a successful business. And even though its collapse would damage the city's economy and put many people out of work, they simply didn't care. The only important thing was their ratings, and they had no empathy for anyone. "Listen," Jason called them. "I have something to say." The press turned their attention to him. "We've all come here today to send a message to the people responsible for this attack on the Fidelity Group," he said. "With our support, the Drakes will not be defeated so easily. The Drake family will always come out on top, and the Fidelity Group will be prosperous once more." The others joined in. "Yes, we support the Drake family. The top families are united in this. The Drakes will survive. Their attackers will not win." Daryl felt compelled to speak up. "The Drake family will soon get through the crisis, and they'll be more powerful than before." The reporters were paying attention now, impressed by this show of strength. The combined wealth of these men's families were considerable. The sound of camera shutters was loud as the reporters captured the moment. "The Marvel family also supports the Drakes." Everyone turned around to see where the voice had come from, and they saw Charles Marvel approach his daughter, Lindsay. they walked over to David. "It's obvious that someone is trying to destroy the Drakes," Charles said to the reporters. "But as David's in-laws, we will stand by the Drake family throughout such difficulties." When Alex had taken Debbie back to Baltimore, the Drakes had agreed not to reveal the true identity of Leona and to conceal the fact that Debbie was related to the Cliftons. As far as the rest of the world was concerned, David and Leona were married. When enough time had passed, David would announce that he and Leona had gotten divorced. In the meantime, David had told everyone that Leona was traveling the world and would be gone for months. With David having married into the Marvel family, the reporters felt it was natural for the Marvels to support the Drakes. "Mr. Marvel," one reporter said, "with everything that has happened, will Leona be returning to support her husband?" "Leona is very concerned about the current situation," Charles said. "She has already talked to David on the phone. Unfortunately, she can't come back right now because of a visa problem, but she wholeheartedly supports the Drake family. For now, we must focus on helping the Drakes solve this crisis." "Thank you," David said, surprised that Charles and Lindsay had come. "Let's go and see my father." Charles nodded. "Join us," David said to his friends. "Come on," Jason said, leading the others into the building. The reporters at the door tried to rush inside, but the security guards stopped them. Another luxury car had also driven up to the building, but had stayed back, keeping a low profile. Colin and his father Joseph sat in the car, watching as the others spoke up in defense of David. "Sycophants," Colin said, sneering at them. "The Drake family is doomed and you're all wasting your time fawning over them. Well, just wait until the Pattersons take over this city. And then we'll see if you lick my boots." Colin took out his phone and called Noah. "Colin," Noah said, his tone respectful. "Are you ready?" Colin asked. "I'm about to take control of all of the Drake family's assets." Joseph looked at his son's ferocious expression and felt a little uneasy. "Yes, I'm ready," Noah said. "I've been working on the other executives, and I've already persuaded 11 of them to resign. Once they do, it'll cost the Fidelity Group another $1 billion. He paused. "But they do have quite costly demands. They want $100 million, and your guarantee that they'll keep their current positions once you take over." Colin smiled. "Whatever," he said. "Tell them I'll give them everything they ask for as long as they help me." Nathan Ambrose had promised to provide $35 billion for Colin to buy out the Drake family. Once Colin had done so, he would have plenty of money. "I'll tell them," Noah said. "Reginald has called all the senior executives in for a meeting, and then I'll complete my task." "I'll be waiting for your good news," Colin said, ending the call. "Are you really going to buy out the Drake family?" Joseph asked, concerned. "I thought you were joking." Last night, when Colin had told him he had a backer who would provide the money to buy the Fidelity Group, Joseph had thought his son had gone mad, and he hadn't taken him seriously. Then, on his way to work this morning, he had seen Colin preparing to go to the Fidelity Group headquarters. When Joseph had asked, Colin had said that this was the day he would buy the Drake's family business. Joseph was worried about Colin, so he had come with him to see what he was up to. But now that he had heard Colin talking to Noah, he suspected Colin had been telling the truth. "Dad, when did I ever lie to you or cause you trouble?" Colin asked. He smiled at his father. Even as a child, Colin had been a good boy, and Joseph had never had to worry about him. "Never," Joseph said. But who gave you $35 billion, and why? Are you sure you can trust them? What if they let you down and offend the Drake family? You know how powerful the Drakes are. Joseph didn't like this at all. Why on earth would anyone give Colin that much money? He won't let me down, Colin said. He wants me to be his puppet in Washington, D.C., and the money is nothing to his family. $35 billion is nothing. Joseph's mouth hung open. Are you crazy? No, I'm perfectly sane, Colin said, rolling his eyes. My backer's family lives in the shadows, but they're seriously rich, wealthier than anyone you can think of, and they have influence all over the world. Joseph gave him a skeptical look. My backer is the heir to this family, so you don't need to worry, Colin said. Just relax and enjoy it. After today, the Pattersons will be the top family in Washington, D.C., and you'll be the father of the richest man in the city. Really? Joseph was stunned, but he decided to wait and see how things would develop. David and his friends walked into the office, and Reginald was surprised to see all these people. Dad, my friends have come to support us, David said. Thank you, Reginald said, standing up to greet them. One by one, they shook his hand. You're welcome, sir. We're David's friends, so his problems are our problems. When I was a child, I often came for dinner in your home. David's like a brother to me. Of course I want to help. My family have always been friendly with yours, so let's deal with your problems together. The Drake family were involved in so many things in Washington, D.C. that many other businesses were connected to them. If the Drake's company collapsed, then their businesses would be affected too. But that wasn't the main reason they had come. These men had grown up with David, and as children, David had been their leader. Whenever anyone had dared to bully any of them, David had helped and protected them. He had never made a fuss about it, but the others had all looked up to him. Later, David had studied abroad, and they hadn't seen much of him, but they all still revered him as much as ever. In the past, David had fought and bled for them, so now that he was in trouble, how could they not help? They were all determined to support David through his difficulties.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.